History loves to portray early humans as the world's first disaster sitcom. Bumbling, clueless grunters scratching their hairy heads like confused raccoons, inventing the wheel by tripping over a rock too stubborn to move, and falling into fire pits like toddlers who skipped nap time and went straight to chaos. They've been cast as evolution's clumsiest interns, permanently hunched, perpetually filthy, and somehow always barefoot, on terrain that looked like it was designed to punish feet. But what if that whole picture is wildly off? What if cavemen weren't slapstick rejects barely surviving extinction, but low-key geniuses, MacGyvering their way through sabertooth ambushes, mammoth stampedes, and spontaneous volcanic fits with nothing but sticks, rocks, and a terrifying amount of confidence for someone in a loincloth? What if behind every matted brow and suspiciously moist grunt was a brain quietly crunching numbers, calculating angles, wind resistance, and the exact top speed of a fleeing mammoth like a prehistoric NASA intern? Maybe the real mystery isn't how humanity survived, but how their genius got so completely lost in translation, dismissed as oafishness just because nobody bothered to ask if the guy in the loincloth was mentally running calculus while dodging a rock slide with a stick and a dream. Rocks were basically laptops. A sharp rock doesn't exactly scream, "visionary breakthrough," until you hand it to a hungry caveman with a bison problem and absolutely no chill. That unassuming hunk of stone could slice meat, shatter bones for marrow snacks, carve spears, dig primitive latrines, or moonlight as an emotional journal scrawled across cave walls. To the modern eye, these tools might look like landscaping leftovers, but to Paleolithic humans, they were top-tier tech, each stone hand-picked like a gourmet cheese, napped at painfully precise angles, and perfected through a time-honored process of hit it again, harder, maybe cry a little. It was basically caveman engineering, equal parts instinct, stubbornness, and prehistoric patent-pending brilliance. The hand axe? That wasn't just a weapon. It was the prehistoric Swiss Army knife minus the logo, the tweezers, and the baffling corkscrew nobody knew how to use. These weren't just wild-eyed rock smashers hoping for a lucky fracture. These were the world's first materials engineers, figuring out complex tool design while still figuring out pants. They knew obsidian made blades so sharp you could do brain surgery with them. Or more realistically, slice mammoth sashimi thin enough to impress even future sushi chefs. They heat-treated flint to shape it better, which is extra impressive considering they were still in the fire is a miracle phase of existence. This wasn't caveman slapstick. This was serious innovation, just with more dirt, more yelling, and fewer safety goggles. Fire wasn't an accident, it was a project. The idea that some allergy-prone Neanderthal sneezed on dry grass and invented fire is possibly the most disrespectful take on human history since someone said cave paintings were just doodles. That myth turns one of humanity's greatest breakthroughs into a prehistoric blooper reel. In truth, making fire with sticks and stones isn't remotely obvious. It's the product of stubborn repetition, monk-tier patience, and an annoyingly deep understanding of friction, airflow, and how not to give up after the 100th smoke puff. This wasn't an accident. It was early science class, except everyone wore loincloths and no one got extra credit for not crying. And once fire was finally wrangled, it wasn't just for grilling meat or not freezing to death. It was humanity's first software upgrade. Fire extended the day past sunset, banished predators from the shadows, and turned slabs of mammoth into gourmet brain fuel. Cooking was the original evolutionary flex. More calories, less jaw work, and suddenly everyone had time to invent tools, draw existential mammoths on cave walls, or figure out how to deliver passive-aggressive grunts. And that fire? It needed constant babysitting. The role of firekeeper didn't go to the village klutz. It was basically the tribe's CT. You had to read ashes like tea leaves, decipher smoke signals, dry soggy wood in a rainstorm, and shield the flame from wind like it was your moody toddler. Fire mastery wasn't a lucky spark. It was a prehistoric PhD, earned with singed eyebrows, blistered hands, and the quiet rage of watching someone accidentally pee on the tinder pile. Language was basically code-breaking with grunts. The stereotype's as old as the cave itself. Some blank-faced caveman squints at a moving bush, points dramatically, grunts like a dying accordion, and flings a rock just in case. It's the original slapstick. But the real story? Way more impressive. and way less monosyllabic. Early humans weren't communication challenged. They were emotional Wi-Fi with surprisingly good range. They had a toolkit of tone, gesture, rhythm, and facial expression so refined it would make a Shakespearean actor look undertrained. Their vocal skills weren't just caveman ASMR. They could pack meaning into a single grunt, an eyebrow twitch, or a side glance that screamed, "Don't eat that, it made Thog see colors." Language didn't just fall from the sky like divine subtitles, it evolved from pure social chaos. The need to cooperate, warn others, flirt badly, and file daily complaints about mammoth dung. And those grunts, they weren't dumb, they were hyperphysical. One grunt might mean duck before you die, another free food, and a third, Zug is violating my personal space again. But throw in a hand gesture, a nose wrinkle, or a dramatic wave, and now you've got a whole sentence, complete with subtext. Proto-languages weren't just noise. They were living systems, as tribe-specific as regional slang, with all the nuance of a soap opera whispered in throat growls. Some sounds even changed meaning depending on stress and rhythm. Basically, prehistoric tone policing. A single gesture could flip danger into danger, but hilarious. And yes, sarcasm likely arrived the exact moment someone tripped into a mud pit and the whole tribe laughed for 20 minutes while muttering, "Nice hunting form." Grog, with that perfect passive-aggressive eyebrow. Cave art wasn't hobby, it was high-tech storytelling. Those mammoth paintings on cave walls, not random scribbles from a caveman with too much time before dinner. They were full-blown immersive media. Think prehistoric IMAX, but with more bison and slightly worse concessions. Early humans didn't just smear stuff around. They brewed their own paint from crushed minerals, charcoal, animal fat, and, yes, the ever-reliable ingredient, spit. And they didn't just draw, they composed. Murals showed motion, emotion, and epic scenes of mammoths mid-stampede, bison getting absolutely outmaneuvered, and hunters executing group choreography with spears. That's not finger painting, that's storyboarding with a vengeance, and some of it, straight up cinematic. Artists used the cave's natural curves to fake depth, like Michelangelo in a fur diaper. When torchlight danced across the surface, the animals seemed to move, snorting, charging, fleeing, like the rock itself was alive and ready to win an Oscar. These caves weren't just shelters. They were theaters, classrooms, and possibly low-budget mystical temples. They taught survival, preserved memory, and maybe even summoned luck. Because if you're about to fight a mammoth, a little magic never hurts. And the wildest part? This wasn't some isolated passion project by a single artsy Neanderthal. Similar styles and themes have been found across continents, like humanity's first global art movement, with no Instagram, no group chats, just a shared instinct to turn stone walls into Netflix specials. These weren't just cavemen, these were storytellers, mythmakers, and the original content creators, turning smudge spit and soot into legacy, and proving once and for all, prehistoric people were anything but primitive. Their social systems were complex. It's tempting to imagine early humans living in total chaos, just stick-swinging maniacs grunting over mammoth scraps, with the biggest guy automatically becoming CEO of the dirt. But the evidence paints a shockingly wholesome picture. These people coordinated, shared, and actually gave a damn. Bands hunted together, raised kids like one big messy family, and looked after their wounded. We're talking skeletons with healed bones. Proof that when someone broke a leg, the tribe didn't say tough luck and toss them to the wolves. They stayed, they helped, they made soup or whatever the prehistoric equivalent was. They had rules, unwritten but deeply understood. Sharing meat wasn't just polite, it was the law. Hog a mammoth thigh and you were remembered. And not in a good way. Conflict? Of course, but so was forgiveness. Tribes had peacemakers, entertainers, storytellers, and almost definitely a local weirdo / therapist. Some wild-eyed elder who smelled like bark and always gave advice that didn't make sense until 3 weeks later. There was hierarchy, sure, but it wasn't some caveman dictatorship. Leaders earned respect through skill and wisdom, not bench-pressing boulders. And if one started getting too shouty or invented taxes, people didn't argue, they just packed up and walked to a different fire. No locks, no leases, no HR meetings. The first political protest in human history, probably just someone standing up mid-grunt and saying, "Yeah, no thanks," before casually wandering off into the woods. childcare was a group project. Modern parenting often feels like a high-stakes, caffeine-fueled solo survival game, part reality show, part psychological experiment, and fully sponsored by sleep deprivation and cold spaghetti. But early humans? They cracked the code way before screen time debates and diaper apps. Their philosophy was simple. If raising a tiny, screaming, potato-shaped human is hard, maybe don't do it alone. Prehistoric tribes went full co-op mode. Grandparents, cousins, neighbors, and that one guy who was just always around, everyone got a turn. It wasn't just about keeping the child alive, though bonus. It was about passing down identity, building trust, and making sure someone knew which mushrooms not to eat. Songs were memory tools. Games were training modules for future mammoth ambushes. Playtime was basically a chaotic internship, and every elder was part babysitter, part teacher, part bedtime philosopher, with a weirdly good memory for old gossip. And let's take a second to appreciate just how hilariously unprepared human babies are. Born with no fur, no instincts, no usable limbs, just a sentient squeak toy with digestion issues. But instead of seeing that as a flaw, early humans saw a golden opportunity. More dependency meant more bonding meant more learning, and more learning meant turning tiny helpless meat larvae into full-grown humans who could invent tools and maybe even basic sarcasm that ridiculously long childhood. It was the cheat code for bigger brains and actual culture. Humanity didn't scrape by despite needy babies, it got smarter because of them. And because there was always someone around to help, whether it was to sing, swaddle, or stop little Oog from trying to eat an angry beetle again. Early medicine wasn't witchcraft, it was chemistry. Sure, early humans didn't have pharmacies with shiny bottles, incomprehensible labels, or a pharmacist asking if you have any questions while holding eye contact for too long. But what they lacked in packaging, they more than made up for with plants, instincts, and an uncanny memory for what didn't immediately kill them. They figured out that chewing willow bark eased pain, basically ancient aspirin, but with extra bark and no childproof cap. They used charcoal to treat poisoning centuries before anyone decided to put it in overpriced smoothies. Honey wasn't just a sweet treat, it was prehistoric neosporin, smeared on wounds like golden goo from the gods. Clays soothed stomachs, moss doubled as squishy bandages, and poplar resin numbed toothaches just long enough for you to pretend your molar wasn't actively trying to ruin your week. And let's not ignore the cave, where archaeologists found a stash of dried psychoactive seeds, evidence that someone, somewhere, was 100% microdosing for either spiritual enlightenment, pain relief, or just to make mammoth tracking feel a little more cosmic. But this wasn't some chaotic buffet of eat it and pray. Trial and error didn't mean random nibbling. It meant detailed observation, pattern recognition, and a whole lot of note-taking via oral tradition. If Thog chewed bark and stopped moaning, you remembered. If Borga ate glowing berries, saw the sky turn into a drum solo, and came back with clear skin, you noted that down as promising but weird. Eventually, all that jungle R&D birthed the shamans. Not just feather-wearing forest oddballs, but the tribe's walking encyclopedias. They were part botanist, part healer, part therapist, and full-time mystery. They knew everything, cured most things, and probably smelled like 12 kinds of root and regret. Travel was not wandering, it was strategy. Nomadic life sounds like wandering aimlessly until you trip over a berry bush, but in reality, it was a masterclass in organized chaos. Early humans weren't just strolling around waiting for inspiration to hit, they were mental cartographers with dirt under their fingernails. They mapped entire landscapes in their heads, where the water was, when the trees bore fruit, which paths mammoths preferred, and which valleys said rain trap without saying it. They timed their migrations with the seasons, like nature's version of Google Calendar. They navigated using stars, wind, animal prints, and probably the occasional "that rock looks familiar" moment. And they didn't move in isolation. Tribes crossed paths like ancient backpackers, exchanging tools, stories, partners, and possibly unsolicited advice about which mushrooms not to touch. There were cross-continental travel routes long before roads, maps, or roadside mammoth jerky stands. That took brain power. Real, adaptable, high-stakes navigation, the kind that makes modern GPS users weep when they miss a freeway exit and have to circle back. One wrong turn back then didn't mean a mild inconvenience, it meant freezing, starving, or getting stared down by something with tusks. but they rarely got lost. They moved with intention, with logic, with pattern recognition, so dialed in it looked like wizardry. Except it wasn't magic. It was just thousands of years of observational excellence, honed into an internal GPS so precise it could shame a satellite. And it never once had to recalculate. Humor existed and it was advanced. People like to assume humor showed up fashionably late. After language got fancy, after leisure time was invented, somewhere between the wheel and writing jokes on clay tablets. But jokes are older than civilization. Humor requires timing, social awareness, and the ability to look at your buddy covered in mud and think, this is comedy gold. That's not immaturity, it's intelligence. Laughter bonds tribes, diffuses tension, signals safety, and pokes authority right in its smug mammoth hide vest. Caveman humor probably included bad impressions of animals, exaggerated hunt fails, dramatic reenactments of grog falling into a river, and the first ever roast session around a fire. Slapstick invented the moment someone got smacked with a fish. Sarcasm invented too early and way too effectively, probably by someone who got banned from the cave for being hilarious. Innovation never stopped. Innovation didn't show up occasionally like a rare eclipse, it was non-stop. Early humans weren't just reacting to nature, they were 2 steps ahead, adjusting faster than the climate could throw tantrums. New tools? Made. New traps? Set. New shelters? Built with whatever wasn't trying to eat them. They adapted to cold, drought, predators, and, let's be honest, soul-crushing boredom. They domesticated wolves, turning murder dogs into loyal companions, hunting assistants, security alarms, and probably prehistoric heated blankets. They upgraded their diets like true culinary experimenters, added fish, smashed nuts, fermented berries, and somewhere along the way invented, oops, just fell in boiling water soup. They made boats, crossed rivers, scaled mountains like sleep-deprived goats, dug pits so deep even future archaeologists would say why, built shelters out of bones, snow, mud, and the occasional full-bodied mammoth poncho. But they didn't just wing it and move on. They passed it all down. Each generation got smarter, quicker, and slightly better at not dying. That's not slow evolution, that's real-time group genius, crowdsourced survival with a side of innovation, passed from parent to child with the urgency of, don't eat that, it killed Uncle Zug. The image of cavemen as bumbling, rock-chucking half-wits is oddly comforting, but totally wrong. These weren't prehistoric clutches stumbling through the dark. They were innovators, artists, survivalists, and full-time problem solvers, living in a death trap of a world with no rule book, no hotline, and no backup plan. They made tools from scratch, lit fires with friction and frustration, cared for the injured like makeshift EMTs, and somehow managed to keep potato-shaped babies alive long enough to become storytelling adults. They painted entire myths on cave walls, charted landscapes in their heads, and found reasons to laugh even when everything around them wanted them dead. And yes, they even loved, in a world where love was risky, messy, and never came with a guarantee. They were smart, not the multiple choice, SAT prep kind of smart, but raw, adaptive, no internet, invent a solution before the sabertooth eats you smart. The kind of smart that survives blizzards, outruns predators, and turns a rock into a revolution. So the next time someone throws around caveman like it's an insult, maybe remember these were the people who figured out how to be human while barefoot, freezing, and inventing everything from scratch. And honestly, that's not primitive. That's genius with a side of mammoth.